Hi, this is the first video in a series on becoming cloud native, what to do when your public sector org wasn't born in the cloud. My name is Daniel Goosen. I'm the Chief Architect of Level Up Technology, and thanks so much for checking this out. Level Up is a systems integrator focused on infrastructure automation, CI/CD pipelines, platform as a service, and Kubernetes. And I've been working with DevOps and Cloud for almost 10 years now, and these are some pro tips that I've collected along the way. So in the first video, we'll be talking about tips 1 through 5, and we'll be talking about the remaining tips in subsequent videos. So in the first place, when we talk about becoming cloud native, whether it's in the commercial or public sector, really it usually happens in 3 steps in our experience. The first step is usually around automation. And so especially things like infrastructure automation. The second step is usually in achieving more of like a platform as a service type approach, as opposed to simply like an IaaS approach that you might get in a public cloud. And then the third step, even though it typically fits somewhere in the middle of the overall diagram that you create for it, is really around middleware. So diving into these a little bit, in the first place with automation, I think it's also really important to say that we want to talk about products that put our designs into practice. And so when we, as a Red Hat partner, talk about Ansible, we're really looking at trying to describe not just in the abstract what configuration management theory or something like that should look like, but really what actual products are on the marketplace that are leading at what they do and why, right? And how we can go about ensuring those best practices. So for Ansible, we like it a lot because it's very readable. It's very lightweight. There's nothing to install on remote nodes, which makes it an excellent use case for things like network automation. It's also declarative, which we'll talk about in a forthcoming video. It's version controllable, very friendly to developer self-service. And so that's in terms of what you would think of as Ansible Community or Ansible Core. Those are some of the key features for it. And then the reason why we like Ansible Tower, the Ansible automation platform, is especially for larger organizations that are more enterprise, have more enterprise type needs. The collaboration, the visualization, and so on that you can achieve with Tower are really substantial and substantial upgrades to the overall experience that you're creating. Single pane of glass, being able to do job scheduling and a variety of other things with Tower, just very, very powerful on the road to becoming cloud native. Step 2, in terms of platform as a service, we highlight Kubernetes because it is really becoming kind of a de facto standard approach to achieving platforms. And so while any containerization is good, if you start working with applications with Docker files, you're on your way to doing good things. Container orchestration, where you get into things like scheduling, scaling, application lifecycle management, and so on, is even better. It's also where when we start to look toward things like autonomic or self-healing computing, where Kubernetes really makes a lot of things very possible to do. And then as far as OpenShift, the way that we think about Kubernetes today is really in 3 general tiers. So there's kind of what happens in the upstream Kubernetes projects that developers are often, open source maintainers are often developing against directly. And then in the middle, you'll have the various native services that will be available in various popular public clouds. And then finally, you graduate to OpenShift and what it can do. So beyond just what it can achieve as far as installation and a lot of the automated operations that you get from it, it's really very good at providing a good developer experience, which is certainly important, especially for adoption. And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. The third step is middleware. And so, as I mentioned, it actually somewhat fits into the middle of most of the diagrams that you would create for anything around being cloud native. It's the type of thing that generally once you're toward the end of implementing and configuring in step 2, you start to realize you probably needed middleware a while ago. And so in general, being able to use runtimes to help you develop and manage your cloud native apps, looking for ways to natively be able to connect apps through integration, through messaging. These are more middleware concepts. And also looking at why Red Hat in the portfolio there really fits so well into achieving a lot of goals for middleware. You've got the runtimes, process automation, decision management, and so forth that are just very, very helpful in bringing a more enterprise grade experience to this aspect as well. Wanted to spend a moment on just talking about public sector in general and why and where the public sector is seeing that cloud native is worth the effort, right? So there's obviously been a lot of headlines around the JEDI program by the DoD. Also, in terms of state and local, we're seeing that putting a greater focus on providing services to constituents as opposed to just managing infrastructure is very important to agencies and organizations in general. Also, hard requirements around disaster recovery, offsite backups, often very much more straightforward to achieve in cloud native or cloud first models. And then there are certainly examples already in the US of smart cities, but this will probably be something at the local level that will be more and more important over time, especially with IoT and just a flood of data points coming in those smart cities paradigms. So that's certainly important to talk about. And then in terms of higher ed, we're producing this video in Q2 of 2020. It's obviously probably never been more important to be able to provide stable virtual classrooms, feature-rich virtual classrooms at that. And this is really in addition to everything that's been necessary to have around cloud-based apps and storage in higher ed, and also more traditional academic research environments. So just want to highlight those. So diving into the tips, the first question that we typically get from customers across both the commercial and public sector is, why should I make any change? And why should I do it now? So the first question that I typically want to ask when I'm talking to leaders in the public sector is really trying to understand what it is that they want to be able to say that they did for constituents during their careers. The public sector has a tremendous amount of passion around service, doing well and doing good. And so one of the things that we want to try to provide as far as assistance is really helping our public sector clients invent the future as opposed to just kind of having to wait around for it to happen to them. And that's a message that we really find is resonating with our public sector clients for sure. This slide, I think, is very helpful, very revealing in a lot of ways. So looking across these three surveys, in the first case, when we talk about things like IT skills gaps in automation, in cloud, and what have you, and I think it's really clear that if we're having any challenges around skills gaps, we're in really good company because it looks like everybody else is as well. And on the right-hand side of this in particular, we see a great opportunity. Everybody's headed toward cloud, and it's really just a question of how we're going to get there. The next tip is around what it means to become cloud native in the sense of it meaning also becoming DevOps, right? The two things are very highly correlated and even dependent. So in a single sentence, I think the best way to say it is that every org is now a software org, and trying to approach pretty much every problem going forward in terms of what can software do to help us solve this problem and go faster and get more done than we ever have before is definitely a good place to start, and a good place to just continue to come back and try to emphasize as much as we can. Also, I think it's important to try to provide a definition of DevOps here. And so in my travels over the last decade or so, I've seen a lot of definitions of DevOps, and I've decided that's totally fine. Everybody can have their own. Here's mine: automation, self-service, and continuous improvement. So we want to automate everything that we can for our clients. If we can't automate it, we want to provide it as self-service so the developer who needs to push a particular button, she's the one who gets to do that. And finally, if we can't do one of those two things, we want to take a step back and really ask ourselves why not. That's where continuous improvement comes in. We look across people, process, and technology. We usually find it's more of an organizational shift that needs to occur to really get us where we want to go around automation and cloud. The third pro tip is really in recognizing that automating everything that we can has to be the first order of business, because it solves so many other problems and it frees up people to do so many other things that are actually truly like novel engineering tasks and things that really drive the agency's mission and so forth in other areas. And this is another large survey and large industry reports. I think they're very helpful in us allowing us to kind of recognize that everybody's trying to go faster, everybody's trying to get more agile in what they're doing, and they're, once again, you're certainly in good company if you're having any of these challenges yourselves right now. The fourth tip is, we've talked about it a little bit, but to go into a little bit more, is just realizing that developer self-service is all about putting the right people in, in the right positions to do, good things for the organization. Sometimes that means allowing the infrastructure folks kind of get out of the way and let developers do what they need to do. I think we've all realized by now that, it's not necessarily true that if we build it, the developers and our internal customers in general will actually use the solutions that we're providing. We know that we need to get the right appropriate amount of influence recognized and kind of acknowledged in our projects early and often, and really be in a position where we're letting the developers in particular drive the technical requirements that they should, while also continuing to really help achieve the overall design and the overall objectives that we may have. Our fifth and final tip for this video is really in recognizing that while we're all familiar with CI/CD and some of the possibilities that we get with a continuous delivery, even continuous deployment approach to our application environments, pipelines are about more than just applications, right? Infrastructure code allows us to do a lot of similar things around pipelining and testing changes that we're making before they go into live environments. And also, even more broadly than that, we can start to think of a number of processes within an organization as also being able to be pipeline driven. And I think that one of the reasons why, we want to take the time to do this is because really, your tools should enforce the processes that you want to have. We shouldn't have too many situations where we've got post-it notes that are just kind of scattered all over monitors, and there are a bunch of things that people have to remember to do when they are using the tools that we're providing. We'd rather be in a position where it's kind of more like a one-way street, very straightforward, very difficult to get lost on your way to where you were headed. And that's where having a framework around building, measuring, and learning in everything that we're doing, processes and products, is super valuable on the road to becoming cloud native. So that's it for part one. Please check out part two.